How do we stop these negative emotional loops? That is the million-dollar question.
My professional life has been devoted to identifying ways to help people manage their emotions. You don't just have to be at the mercy of your emotions. You have agency. Once an emotion is activated, we can push it around in different ways. We can increase or decrease its intensity. We can make it last longer or shorter. Sometimes you could shift even from one emotional experience to another one altogether. And so then the question is, okay, well, how do you do that?
Dr. Ethan Kross is one of the world's leading experts on emotion regulation. He's an award-winning professor in the University of Michigan's top-ranked psychology department, and he's the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. Dr. Kross's research has been cited in top peer-reviewed journals and featured all over major media. He's here to share some groundbreaking insights about managing your emotions so that they don't manage you. First and foremost, thank you so much for making the pivot to be here with us and share these insights, because I know you flew in here to do some of the top shows and to be here in the studio with me. But something, I don't even know the words to process what took place, but can you share a little bit about your experience, coming here and then why we're doing this virtually right now?
Yeah, so we're recording this virtually a week after I evacuated LA. So I flew in earlier last week, and quite frankly, I've been so just overwhelmed with work. I've been running from like meeting to dinner to sleep and all over again. It's just been that kind of series of days. So much so that I found myself in the airport getting ready to go on a plane to LA and getting a text message from my wife saying, "Have you heard about what's happening there?" And I was like, "No, what's going on?" I didn't have a chance to read the paper. She's like, "The fires." And, I just figured, well, if it's bad, they're not going to fly there. And so I got on the plane, took it across country, and then I should have known something was up when the pilot started announcing over and over and over to buckle up. They usually do it like once, but they just kept on doing it. And next thing I know, we're doing the equivalent of what I imagine is like a military landing through hurricane winds. I mean, the amount of topsy-turviness on this flight was extreme. I kid you not when I tell you I was left nauseous for I went to bed nauseous. I woke up nauseous. It was not pleasant. And that was just the beginning of the fires. And I was hoping to be in the studio with you and had a bunch of other meetings. I was staying in West Hollywood, seemed pretty sheltered. I was monitoring the situation as it grew worse, and just tragic. And then one night before dinner, on the second night, I look out my window and I can see the Hollywood Hills fire. And then a little voice inside me said, "Time to go." And so I had to leave. But, I've been monitoring the situation, trying to help where I can. And you were gracious enough to host me virtually. So I'm happy to be here with you, and delighted that you've been safe through all this, which is my understanding. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you for that. And our studio was shut down for a little bit. We're right on the edge of Encino. And, obviously we were just on standby. 10 minutes away from here, my close friend, got a knock at the door in the middle of the night that they had to evacuate. The fires were crawling from the Palisades and getting closer. And she's been here for over 20 years. She couldn't imagine that from the Palisades that they would make their way to Encino. And so, yeah, it's been, I don't even have the words, but a big part of this conversation. And not only is this relevant and powerful for us right now, but moving forward in our lives as well, is being able to understand, process, and even shift our emotions.
Absolutely.
And I can imagine you went through a whole smorgasbord of emotions in your own experience, and being able to have these tools is obviously important. And we're going to get to that. But first, I want to start with something that every single person listening experiences on a daily basis, pretty much throughout the entire day. But there's this voice in our head. There's this inner chatter that's going on What is this internal chatter that's going on in our heads?
Well, the internal chatter, if you've got it, welcome to the human condition. It's quite common, and essentially, it's our ability to silently use language in our minds, and we often call that like an inner voice, and it's a really useful tool. It's I like to call it a Swiss Army knife of the mind because it's you remember Swiss Army knife, Sean?
Of course, of
Yeah.
course.
Not everyone does. Younger generations do not always
I
know.
love the corkscrew one, even though I never opened a wine bottle when I had one as a kid.
There you go. There you go. So Swiss Army knife multi-purpose tool, that's your inner voice. It does really simple things for you, like lets you keep information active in your head. Like you go to the grocery store and you think about what you're supposed to buy, you go down the list, cheese, yogurt, apples. You tend to do that silently, not out loud. Your inner voice lets you do that. You sometimes go over what you're going to say before an important presentation or maybe interview or when you were a younger date. Did you ever do that? Like you went over in your head the talking points? That's a question for you.
Oh, I mean, I went on a lot of days. I don't, I just kind of let it flow, I guess.
Well, it's incredibly common. Like people will often rehearse like what they're going to say right before they go on. Like I do this before big talks. I just I go over how I'm going to open it up. That's my inner voice. I use my inner voice when I'm working out. I coach myself along. You got this. 3 more sets. 3, 2, 1. And we use our inner voice to make sense of our lives. Like we use our inner voice to make meaning out of terrible experiences. We create stories with our inner voice. The big catch is that this is an incredible tool, but it often jams up on us. So when we're really struggling with adversity, sometimes we reach for this tool to try to come up with a new explanation. Like, well, what does this mean about me and my future? We don't come up with clear solutions. Instead, we start spinning. And we get lost in this experience of what I call chatter, which is the dark side of the inner voice. So, chatter is getting stuck in a negative thought loop. It's worrying about the future, ruminating about the past. How do you know you're experiencing it? If you ever find yourself trying to work through a problem in your head, but not making any progress, you just keep turning it over and over and over. Or sometimes you may criticize yourself, like berate yourself incessantly. I'm an idiot, such an idiot. Those are two telltale signs. And I think it's a big problem we face because it makes it hard for us to think and perform, creates friction in our relationships, and it can undermine our health. So, a lot of what we do in my lab is try to understand the tools that people can use to manage that kind of emotional condition and many others too.
Amazing. Thank you for shedding some light on. Again, this is something that for most of us, it's on autopilot. We never think about it. It's just like we think that that's who we are, like that voice in
Yep.
our head. And when you mentioned talking to ourselves, again, this is the human condition because it can sound like a quote mental condition if you got a voice in
Yeah.
your head. And matter of fact, it might be multiple voices, but this is, and you can have a whole conversation in your head. And I thought about, for example, when I'm speaking to myself, like one of those moments. And when you mentioned working out, and one of the things that I say at when I'm doing the last set, right before I do every last set, in my head, I say last set, best set. I say it like out loud in my head. Sometimes I'll literally say it out loud, And again, this is one of
It's
the things.
motivating.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that we evolve to have. And we also can have a relationship with this.
Mhm.
And this leads to how do we feel in response to the thoughts that are going on in our head. And this is opening the door on us understanding what our emotions are. And this is a huge topic. And I'm going to actually share from your book. This is one of the things that really jumped out to me. You said in your book that emotions are central to our existence, yet no one is sure what they actually are. This is central to our existence, yet most of us have no idea what they actually are. So what are emotions?
Yeah, well, before I answer that, and I promise you I will, I'm not doing the classic politician pivot here. I will answer that question, but I just want to punctuate how central they are and how big of a deal it is that we struggle with it. So I think few listeners would contest that they've been experiencing emotions throughout their lives, probably even before when they were in the womb, they were having little emotional reactions. So like we are bathing in these emotional reactions from the time we are growing, right, in the womb. And yet, when I ask a new class on the first day, all right, who wants to come up here and define what an emotion is? Everyone kind of looks at each other and just gets really uncomfortable, right? And it's this, on the one hand, very familiar universal experience, but we don't have really like vocabulary to talk about it. So what are they? Uh, I think emotions are tools. They are tools that help give us the best chance of navigating the circumstances we are in. Let me drill down and tell you a little bit more about that. So we experience emotions in response to events, circumstances that we judge to be meaningful to us in some way. Sometimes these are things that happen to us in the world. Sometimes these are thoughts that activate in our minds or even sensations we experience, but we interpret them as meaningful. And then when we interpret them as meaningful, a loosely coordinated response is activated in our bodies, in our behaviors, and up here in our brains. And so what do I mean by that? Let's take an emotion like anxiety. So if I become anxious about something in the future, I'm going to have a characteristic fight or flight physiological response. For me, that really manifests itself in terms of some gastric distress, i.e., like I'm right in the toilet, like right away. Anyone in my family knows if I'm experiencing some anxiety because, I'll spare you the details, but you can hear the flush,
Hit
right?
hit the
And
evacuation button.
right, like preparing me to deal with a threat that exists happens super fast. Um, I'm also cognitively zooming in now, narrowly, focusing on the threat at hand, putting the blinders on to really everything else. I've got my eye on this thing that's really important. My motor behaviors, my facial expressions are also often being activated. So I'm clenching up, and you can tell if someone's anxious often, like you could see it in their face. All of those different responses are really designed to help you in this situation. If the response is activated in the right proportions, not too intensely, not too long. When I think back, I do a lot of public speaking and I think about the times a talk didn't go very well. It's typically a time when I didn't feel any anxiety before because there was nothing to cue me to prepare, to give me that little bit of arousal, to energize me, to really stick the landing here, right? It's when I have a moderate level of that kind of anxious arousal that I really nail it. So that's what emotions are. They are, you can think about them as these like little software programs that get activated that are designed to help you achieve certain goals that you have. But sometimes it can be hard to navigate those programs, right? Like they just start acting up on you and in ways that are not particularly helpful. And unfortunately, that happens a lot of the time for a lot of people. And that's where the importance of understanding how to manage your emotions is so useful. And I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll turn it back to you. On the one hand, we evolve this capacity to experience all of these different emotions to help us in the world. Right. So anxiety we talked about, but we could talk about the utility of lots of different emotions like sadness or envy. But we also co-evolved tools to rein those emotions in when we find them taking over. And I think that's kind of cool. Right. So it isn't that we just evolve the capacity to feel, we also evolve the capacity to regulate. And the real opportunity we face is to learn about what those tools are.
It's powerful, powerful. So one of the big takeaways is our emotions are data. That's what I'm hearing. And
That's right.
also they're catalysts for action. And this might not necessarily be like external action, but even as you mentioned, regulating and being able to take internal action and to associate with things in a more helpful way. And so you
That's right.
mentioned how we evolved to have these emotions. And would you say this is one of the things that really makes us human?
Oh, absolutely. I think emotions are fundamental to the human experience. It is in some ways the essence of our experience. There's this one study I love, I quoted in my book. the um, the experimenters tracked people over time and text messaged them throughout the day, every day. And each time they texted them, they asked them to just check which different emotions they were experiencing, a bunch of positive and negative ones. People reported experiencing some kind of emotion approximately 90% of the time. So most of the time we're awake, we are experiencing an emotion. I would argue that we're experiencing emotions when we're sleeping too. It's a little bit harder to document that, but I certainly experience some wild emotions when I'm sleeping. So we are fundamentally emotional species. And yet what's astounding to me is we're emotional. Sometimes the emotions get the best of us. I think we've all had those experiences. And yet we don't have classes in elementary school and middle school and high school teaching us about the scientific tools for managing those responses. And we have knowledge about what those tools are. And that was a big motivation for, writing this book. Just to kind of put in perspective how important a problem this is. One of the things I did in the book is I got to look at the history of emotion and emotion regulation. And one of the things that I found unbelievable is that if you look back in time, between 8 and 10,000 years ago, we invented the first surgical technique. It was called trepanation, and it involved drilling holes in people's skulls. One of the reasons why this was believed to be used was to help people manage extreme emotions, right? Like back then, our understanding of emotions wasn't as sophisticated. So something was, if you were really anxious or depressed, maybe you had an evil spirit inside you. Let's let that spirit out. First surgical technique ever developed was used in part to help people manage their emotions. That just puts in perspective for me just how big a problem this is.
Right. So again, humans have been pondering this for a long, long time. And and this is just a sidebar question, are our emotions what we feel? Like, is there a difference with what we're feeling and the emotion itself? Are feelings and emotions one thing?
No, they're a little bit different. So let me break it down. You can think of emotion as the umbrella term. So when you're experiencing emotion, there are different parts. There's what's happening in your body physiologically. There's what's happening cognitively in your mind, your thinking patterns, how you're making sense of the circumstances. And then there are also these motor behaviors and expressions that are often part of an emotional experience. A lot of what I just described, you have no awareness of what's going on when you are experiencing an emotion. You're not actually sure how your, immune system is responding to that. It's happening outside your awareness. The part of an emotional experience that you are aware of, we call that your feelings. So in the same way, like when you're physically ill, you have the flu, you're not aware how your organs are functioning differently, but you are aware of the fever you have and the chills you're experiencing. That's what our feelings are when it comes to our emotions. It's the part of the experience that we are consciously aware of.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That makes so much sense. Now, I think just based on what I've learned from you, reading your book and studying your work and even this conversation, what makes us unique as humans is because other species obviously experience emotions and feelings as well, but it's our ability to think about our thinking, to think about our emotions. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling this sadness? And being able to go through and to process things, to think about things, to attach to things, we can consciously and, of course, unconsciously attach to these things. But I think that this is part of our superpower in a way, is to be able to think about our thinking, to be able to analyze our emotions and not let our emotions control our life. Would that be adequate to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a technical term for that. We call it metacognition. So it's thinking about thinking. And, in a certain sense, that's what we're talking about doing here today, right? You don't just have to be at the mercy of your emotions. You have agency. You have the capacity to intervene, to manage their trajectory. Sometimes people debate whether you can actually control your emotions. And there was a study, I'll never forget it, that I came across several years ago. They asked participants to indicate, do you think you can control your emotions? About 40% said you can't. And, on the one hand, I found that really surprising because my professional life has been devoted to identifying ways to help people manage their emotions. But when I really drilled down to think about it, I realized that those participants, there was some logic to what they were saying. On the one hand, we can't control the emotions that are automatically triggered often as we live our lives, right? You pass by a foul-smelling object or person on the street, like you're going to experience an emotional response out of your control, right? You're going to have a sensory experience that's going to motivate that
Or a
response.
skunk, by the way.
A skunk.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess it's because of
better.
the fires, but I saw a skunk walking down my street here in the valley. I didn't even know they were out here like that. As you were saying.
Yes, stay away, right? But like that's one example. Shawn, I'm going to guess that every now and again you experience a dark thought that you would probably be ashamed or embarrassed to say out loud. And it just pops in your head. You're not really sure why. Is that a fair assumption to make?
If you're going to put me on the spot, yes. We all have some crazy thoughts. Like, why did I think that? That was
why did I
insane.
think that? Look, yeah, we've never talked about this. I felt pretty comfortable asking you that because there's been a lot of research on this. We know that that's a near universal experience. Like I have those thoughts too. And what I realized is it's a natural byproduct of how our brains work. There's nothing wrong with me when I experience that, oh boy, really unpleasant thought. I don't have control over that. I can't predict when I'm going to experience that dark thought that may lead me to feel a particular way. I don't have control over when I'm going to randomly just cross paths with someone who smells really great. And maybe, I take in a scent that makes me want to approach them or stay away. I can't control those experiences. And a lot of our emotional lives is filled with those kinds of automatically triggered emotional responses. So we don't have control over them. What we do have control over them, where our playground resides, is once those emotions are activated, how we can modulate their trajectory, whether we amplify or diminish them, whether we prolong the emotional episode or cut it short. That's where the real opportunity zone is for getting in there and managing our emotions. And there's a lot of good you can do if you know how to use the tools that are out there to manage those emotional responses. It's kind of like the way I like to describe this to folks that I think hits home is, let's say you have the goal to become physically fit. And so you get a gym membership and you show up at some new shiny gym and all of a sudden you've got all these shiny machines. You got to learn first, like how to use the machines, right? And then figure out what combinations of exercises serve you best. That's really that's really the prospect here when we're talking about our emotional lives and becoming emotionally fit. It's learning about the different tools that are out there and then finding out which are the ones that uniquely work well for me.
Right. And that's the key. It's uniqueness. And we'll talk more about that, but I want to get into the deep stuff. All right. The stuff that, again, this is like happening and sometimes even controlling our life. And we never step back to think about it. We have this concept in our culture of good and bad emotions. All right. We want more of the good. I just want joy. I want happiness. I want overriding feelings of fulfillment and love. We don't want the anger. We don't want the sadness. We don't want the depression. We don't want the grief, right? We've kind of created this dichotomy, right? This binary, this or that. These are good emotions. These are bad emotions. Run away from the bad emotions. Run towards the good emotions. And reading your work, it really brought right in my face this idea that these emotions are bad or good is a misnomer. Because in what it did, I asked myself a question. Inner chatter again. I asked myself a question. If this emotion is bad, why do we have it? Why do we have it? Why do we have all these so-called bad emotions? And if you could, can you talk about this dichotomy. Is there such thing as a good versus a bad emotion?
I don't think there is. I think all emotional experiences are useful when they're activated in the right proportions, not too intense, not too extreme, because they provide us with useful information and motivate us to manage particular kinds of situations. This is true of even the quote unquote bad emotions. Part of what makes those bad emotions so amazingly functional, so useful, is that they draw our attention in. The badness, the negative feeling makes it hard to ignore them. Just to really like make this point abundantly clear, I'd love for us to just talk about one of my least favorite experiences, physical pain. Shawn, you don't know me that well, but despite my imposing stature on this podcast right now, I am a giant baby, giant baby. I do not like physical pain. Right, like my. Well, I'll leave it at that. I'm giving you the image. I will do a lot to avoid physical pain. Um, and yet, I'm not giving physical pain up in my life because we know what happens to people who don't experience physical pain. They die young. So there are babies born into this world every year, and due to a genetic anomaly, they're incapable of experiencing physical pain. Life is not blissful for them because what happens is their arm gets caught in a stove and they don't experience any sensation that directs them to pull their arm away. As a result, they suffer tissue damage, or they start scratching that mosquito bite and they keep on scratching it even after they break the skin and it becomes infected. Physical pain provides a very, very useful signal that benefits us as we navigate the world. The same is true of all of those different negative emotions that we have. They draw our attention to particular circumstances that are important to us, that require action. What I do wish for myself and everyone else is that we can experience those emotions, derive the usefulness of them, and then move on without bathing in them. That is a less desirable state. But all emotions in their right proportions are quite useful. And so, you hear a lot about this idea, this kind of toxic positivity angle that is swept through society of just being motivated to live a life bereft of any negative emotion. Do I think that's a great goal to have? No, I don't like to judge goals, but I think this is probably not a good one for two reasons. Number one, I think it's impossible. And number two, I think it's actually suboptimal. Uh, I'm not as good at what I do if I don't experience anxiety at times. I'm not as good of a parent as I can be if I don't sometimes experience a ping of anger when I see my kids doing something really dangerous that might affect their well-being. Right? Anger is an emotion we experience when we register some violation of our understanding of how things should be, and there's an opportunity to fix the situation. So if I see my daughters riding their bikes without their helmet, a little bit of anger is going to motivate me to intervene and correct that situation. And we could go down the list of negative emotions and talk about their different functionalities, but the whole idea is that these negative emotions, they're a gift, they're a tool. And here's what I have found in talking to people about this over the past several months. People actually find this message liberating because these negative experiences are an inevitable part of our lives. And if you experience them from time to time, there's nothing wrong with you. To the contrary, there's everything right with you. Embracing that idea, I think, can be really comforting and is the first step to then really thinking about, okay, if these negative emotions are a part of my life, how do I incorporate them into my life most skillfully? And that's where the management piece comes into play.
Yeah, I love this already. There's a couple of things I think in our culture that's fighting against us, applying what you're talking about. One is a kind of a disassociation from our emotions, in where we spend most of our time as children going through, the education system. It's about all of these external things. It's externally directed. And there is inevitably going to be an internal soup of all kinds of emotions and all kinds of things going on. And like your social adaptation is like a separate subject. Are they adapting socially? But most of the time is spent educating us about things that are outside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And there is very little, if any, education about understanding what we all are really experiencing every moment of every day, which is this internal terrain, understanding our emotions, understanding what they are. You know, you talking about this is central to our existence. And yet we don't talk about this. If you're lucky, you know, once you maybe get into college or you take a fringe high school class, maybe you talk a little bit about
That's right.
emotions, but this is something that it's not a part of our culture to educate. It's
That's
changing.
right.
It's changing. So that's number one. And number two, being that we don't talk about these things, and because of our cultural programming influences, we might be led to believe that having these, what we label to be negative emotions, is a bad thing. And it can become this vicious circle. And what happens is we have a culture that largely medicalizes our emotions and doesn't focus on, again, helping us to better relate to them. Now, of course, you mentioned there are extremes when you get caught in, you know, extreme versions of these emotions. But how about we have the tools that help us before we even get there? You know, for the majority of people, I think that that would be very helpful. But we don't have, again, a culture that educates us and supports us in doing that. So I think those are a couple of things that are fighting against us having this awareness. And this is why I think your work is so freaking important, especially important right now, is it's directing us back inwards and giving us some of these tools.
Well, you know that we see eye to eye. That is the whole hope here. The hope here is that we could begin to shift the culture around these issues to get this information into people's heads so they could start benefiting from it. I remember, I had a real turning point in my, life, I should say, not even my career. Maybe about 9 or 10 years ago, I was teaching a class to undergrads at the university here at Michigan, and it was a class on many of the tools that I wrote about in Shift and in my previous book, Chatter. And the way the course was structured, every week students would read, they'd come to me, I'd ask them questions, we'd have a great conversation, we'd repeat it the next week. And then the final assignment of the semester was for students to come with questions for me. Anything, they were now experts. All right, what's on your mind before you leave? And I'll never forget, this one girl raises her hand to start the class and she says, "Why are we learning about this now?" And I had no idea what she was asking me. And, when you teach a course more than once, you kind of you know what questions you're going to get. You just, it's, you sit there. Oh, it's a good question. Then you answer them. You go through the motions, but you know what you're going to get. This was a question I'd never gotten before. And I didn't know what she meant. So I asked her to elaborate, and she goes, well, we've been learning about all these things we can do to manage our emotions and think and feel better. Why didn't anyone teach us about this earlier in life when they could have made a difference? So the first thing I did is I added some humor to the situation, or I tried to diffuse the seriousness. I said, "Fear not, there will be opportunities you have to manage your emotions once you leave college."
Mm.
And then I did something that you might describe as somewhat cowardly or evasive. I paused and I looked at the class and I said, "What does everyone else think about this question?" And I let them try to answer it because I had no freaking idea. And so after that class, I started doing some introspection, and I decided I wanted to shift my career a little bit more towards addressing that situation and teaching people about what we know from the scientific point of view about how to manage our emotions. Because a lot of complexity has gone into that work, but I think the take homes often are really, really simple and clear, and they have the potential to benefit people in terms of how they address an issue that is currently plaguing society, our inability to manage these emotions, and has for some while.
Wow. You know, I think this is a good point for us to put an exclamation mark on why this matters. And I think this is really well highlighted in the Dunedin study that you shared in the
Mhm.
book. Let's talk about that.
So the Dunedin study is, or you may be pronouncing it correct. I always get it. I
I
don't
don't
even
know. Shout
remember
out to
how to
everybody
pronounce it.
listening that's down under. Much love.
That's right. But we may have gotten it wrong. But it's an amazing study, one of the most famous studies, shaping up to be one of the most famous behavioral studies of all time. And so, what this intrepid group of researchers started doing is tracking these kids from the time they were babies. And they meticulously index their ability to manage their emotions and exert self control at various points during their childhood and adolescence, and then kept tracking these kids. Every few years, they would assess them on a variety of different outcomes, ranging from how well they were doing in work and school and life, to their physical fitness levels, to um, their brain health, and how their organs were aging. And what they found across the board was the kids who did better at emotion regulation earlier on in life, kids who had better, they call self-control, but managing yourself, across the board, they fared much better. It predicted a host of positive outcomes later on in life. So this really matters. And what was really inspiring about that study is, well, some may think, oh, based on that finding, well, that just means if you're good at self-control, great. The future is your oyster. You can do whatever you want. But if you're not, good luck. You're in trouble. But that's not exactly what they found, because what they found was that some kids got better with their emotion regulation as time progressed, and some got worse. And as they got better or worse, so did the different outcomes they were tracking. And so what I love about that study is it illustrates just how consequential this capacity to manage our emotions is for really all that matters in our lives. We know that how well you manage your emotions, it influences how you think and perform. Think about that for a second. Thinking and performing. That's like, okay, that's the work bucket right there, right? That's the achievement bucket, the school bucket. It influences the quality of your relationships. When we're having trouble managing our emotions, we know that this can exert real strain on the relationships we have with other people in our lives. Relationships are one of the best predictors of long-term well-being, right? And then there's our physical and mental health. And we know that not managing your emotions well, that can predict a host of physical problems of the sort that, you've gotten into with lots of guests before and have written about too. Sleep is a big one, of course. Like, how many people have trouble sleeping because they can't manage their emotions well? This is pervasive, like across the board. Like, during talks and workshops, I go, hey, anyone ever find that they have some trouble sleeping because they're dealing with a big emotion that they can't quite get their handle on? Every handle, every hand in the room goes up. So thinking and performance, relationships, subjective well-being, physical health. How you manage your emotions has implications for all of those experiences in our lives. It's a really important thing you want to pay attention to. It's probably not surprising that one of the most famous stories in the best-selling book of all time is a story about the pitfalls of not managing your emotions well. I mean, you know what trivia here, Jeopardy mode. What is the best-selling book of all time, Shawn?
I'm going to guess the Bible.
You got it. All right, you're 1 for 1. Now I'm going to tee up one more question and then you're free. So, what is the most famous story in that best-selling book of all time involving two other people?
Involving two other people. Is this the story of...
And a serpent.
Oh, Adam and Eve.
All right,
Let's
there we
go.
go. 2 for 2. You see, we're a good team here. Story of Adam and Eve. What is that a story of? Don't eat the forbidden fruit. Right? Like temptation and the inability to manage our response to that. We can look at those cultural artifacts and we see our ancestors repeatedly emphasizing how important it is to understand how to manage our emotions well. And, last time I checked, the statistics are in the introduction. We've made some progress, but we've got a long ways to go. And that's where this knowledge is so powerful.
Absolutely. So again, just to reemphasize this, our lives can be exponentially more rewarding, fulfilling, healthy, successful, good relationships, all these things is seen in one of the longest running human studies. This is like, this is a big deal based on our ability to healthfully manage our emotions. And the good news is this is something that isn't static. You don't get here
That's
with a
right.
certain, EQ, and then it's just this is all you can do about it. It's just like you got this. This is how you deal with your emotions, and that's your lot in life. This is something that we can improve over time, or it can deteriorate over time.
That's
And
right.
getting yourself educated is a big part of this, and just learning, having some self inquiry. And I think that this is a good opportunity to talk about one of the things that many of us experience, at least at some point in our life, which is getting trapped in a negative emotion, right? Having an experience, more than likely, that makes us feel stuck. And we start to have that chronic experience of, maybe this is depression, maybe this is something related to fear and anxiety. And maybe again, there's a catalyst, and you give great examples in the book about, like the mom on the plane and the experience with her child, and how that one experience started to color her entire life and put her into a perpetual loop of negative emotions. So I want to ask you, number one, please share that story. And number two, how do we stop these negative emotional loops? That is the $1 million question.
Yes. So the story I tell in the book is about a mom who, was on a plane with her daughter, like so many of us have been with our children. And all of a sudden, she looks over and realizes that this really tragic event has occurred. Her daughter eats one of the snacks, and the daughter has like a peanut allergy, and the snack had the toxic substance in it for her daughter. And all of a sudden, she starts going into this, having this allergic reaction. And she has to react super fast. She whips out her EpiPen and jams it into her daughter's thigh, and ultimately her daughter recovers pretty quick. Modern medicine is pretty amazing. But after this experience is over, the mom can't get out of her head what could have happened had she not had that EpiPen, or what could happen if her daughter somehow comes in contact with the allergen in another context. Maybe it's at a birthday party where another parent isn't being vigilant. And these worries that she has about her daughter begin to really mushroom and metastasize in her mind, to the point where it's really dysfunctional. She's having a lot of trouble focusing. All the things I mentioned before. She's having trouble, focusing. She's not performing well at work. She's talking about this incessantly to her partner, to the point where the partner is getting frustrated because he's trying to be supportive, but there's only so much support sometimes you can give before you start feeling frustrated yourself. And it's influencing her health and well-being. And so I think that story that I use in one of the chapters to talk about what are the different parts of our emotions that we can versus can't control. Um, it it taps into, I think, a very common experience that lots of us have at times, which is sometimes we find ourselves going down the rabbit hole. There's an experience that may lead us to become upset, and it makes good reason why we have an initial emotional reaction. But this is what I mean in terms of that reaction then being out of proportion. It sticks around way too long and it becomes too intense, to the point where it is no longer functional. In fact, it is dysfunctional. And once you find yourself slipping into that state, this is where we need to intervene. Now, I'm going to tell you something, Shawn, now that could either be interpreted as a huge bummer or an amazingly uplifting message, which is, when that happens, there are no one size fits all solutions. I am often asked by journalists, what's the one thing you should do to manage your emotions in this situation? I genuinely cannot answer that question. I can tell you what the one thing I do is to manage my emotions. But we know from lots of research that different combinations of tools work for different people in different situations. We did this research during COVID where we were looking at what are the tools that work well for people to reduce their anxiety each day that they're going through COVID. We looked at this over time. What we found is first, most people don't do just one thing. They do like three or four. Secondly, the three or four things that I do were very different from the five or six that, my best friend did, or the two or three that my wife did. There's enormous variability in which tools we bring to bear to manage those emotional experiences. Embracing that, I hope, is not a bummer for people because there's no simple solution. I think it should be uplifting because it means that if you've tried a tool that works for someone else, but not for you, like meditation or being in the now, lots of us talk about the importance of that. No big deal. There's lots of other stuff you do. No one questions this kind of reasoning when we talk about physical fitness and health, right? Like I'm going to guess if you and I were to compare notes about what we do at the gym, we're going to have different routines that we engage in. And that's fine as long as we're achieving the goals that we have. No one questions the fact that when I go to the gym, I do 7 or 8 exercises on a few days of the week, and then I mix it up and I do some entirely different things on other days. Because we know that's a routine that works optimally to help us become mentally fit. And there are different routines for different people. We are learning that the same is true of emotional fitness. Different tools work for different people. And I think we really need to embrace that from the outset.
All right. See, you're my guy. All right. This is the truth that sometimes again we don't want to hear, but it can be empowering. And it's that there isn't a one size fits all solution for just about anything, right? They're going to
Yeah, I mean,
be
yeah, that's right.
they're going to
You get
be
me animated. I'm interrupting you because you're getting me so excited. You don't even have to put Journey on in the background here. Keep going.
I was just going to say that, there are things that are similar, right? We have they relate. And this reminds me actually of having dinner last night with my family. And my youngest son grabbed these conversation cards. And, we went around and answered a bunch of these different questions, talked about some different things like, talk about a caregiver who really inspired you or really helped you in a positive way. And what's one thing that you wish that they would have done differently, right? So that was one of the questions. Another one of the questions involved appropriately emotions. And it essentially asks like, what is one emotion that you enjoy feeling on a regular basis, right? And so, of course, everybody shared like more of a positive emotion. And then what is an emotion that you would rather not experience very much, right? And then everybody kind of shared what we deem to be a negative emotion. But because of this, I dug in on these negative emotions and how valuable and okay they are to have. And I shared this insight with my family that no two people in the history of humanity have ever experienced the same emotion.
It's how, there's a colleague of mine, Lisa Feldman Barrett, an effective emotional scientist. She's described emotions as our emotional lives as being akin to a fingerprint, incredibly and utterly distinctive and unique. And that strikes me as quite true in the sense that there are, that our own personal experiences are shaping the way we interpret the world around us and how we respond emotionally to that world. And there's beauty in that complexity. It's beauty that we shouldn't become dismayed about. Given how unique our emotional lives are, why would we expect there to be one thing we can do to manage them across the board? It doesn't actually make much sense. And I'm like, Shawn, when the hell did we come up with this assumption that you have to have a simple one size fits all solution to our emotional lives? Like, we built our house. I'm using we very, very generously. I did nothing to build the house personally, but I was involved in the process. But, you look at the people who built the house, they come with lots and lots of tools, not just one tool, lots of tools. Of course, they have multiple tools. I would be extremely concerned if a carpenter or plumber I hired came with one each. So why, when it comes to something as infinitely more complicated in some ways, managing our emotions, right? Like, we don't have a blueprint we're following to do that. We're trying to just figure this out. Why do we think that there should just be one thing we can do? There isn't. And I think the more we embrace that, the better off we'll be.
Well, this leads us to, because of course we want people to be able to walk away today with some tools to feel more of how we want to feel, to experience and to process our emotions, manage our emotions in a more healthful way. And what you deliver in the book on multiple levels are these tools and insights. And we had this going. You mentioned Journey, all right, before the show started. We were playing Journey in here, inspired by you. And
love it.
These are these perspective shifters, right? Being able to shift. So let's talk a little bit about what you mean with shift, which is the title of the new book. And let's talk about some of these tools. What can people utilize in their lives on a regular basis to more healthfully manage and relate to their emotions?
So, we all have, so when I use the term shift to convey that once an emotion is activated, we can push it around in different ways. We can increase or decrease its intensity. We can make it last longer or shorter. Sometimes you could shift even from one emotional experience to another one altogether. And so then the question is, okay, well, how do you do that? And that's where the shifters come into play. Shifters are tools that we all possess, that if we know how to harness them, we can use them to steer those emotions around in the directions we want, rather than the opposite, having those emotions just take us wherever they're going to go. There's some shifters that exist inside us, and then there's some that exist in the world around us. And I'll just go through a few of them, and then maybe we can dig into some. There are three shifters inside us. One is sensation. Our sensory experiences powerfully shift us. We all know this intuitively, but the research shows that we don't always act on this knowledge when we can benefit from it. One of the way our senses, we make sense of the world: sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. One of the way those sensory channels work is through emotion. So you ask people, why do you listen to music? Close to 100% will say they listen to music because they like the way it makes them feel. Right? It's an emotional enterprise. I went to a Taylor Swift concert a couple of months ago, and I sat there with my daughters and wife looking around. And here's this amazingly talented artist on the stage with a guitar, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm in this baseball stadium. Everyone here just paid, I don't know, collectively tens of millions, maybe more money, to have an emotion regulation experience through sensation, right? This one person is strumming their guitar and singing, and those sounds are powerfully captivating our emotions. So music's a powerful one. But if you look at, well, when people experience different negative emotions, do they instantly reach for music to push their emotions around? The answer to that question is no. And so we've done studies on this. We asked people, last time you were angry or anxious or depressed, what did you do? Only between 10 and 30% of the participants reported using music. I was guilty of this too before I had an experience with my daughter that highlighted for me the power of music. And it goes back to our favorite, I guess we'd call it an 80s power ballad band, Journey. I was taking my daughter to soccer practice, to a soccer game, and she was in a funk. It was bumming me out. Journey happened to come, play on the radio, and I start feeling it in my bones, and I'm bopping my head, and I'm starting to sing. And then I look in the back in the rear view mirror and I see my daughter. She's probably like 5 or 6 at the time. And I see she's bopping her head. And I see a little smile come on her face. And then I'm like leaning into the experience with her, right? And, I'm opening the window and jamming out, and she's a little embarrassed, but having fun. And the next thing I know, she's super animated. We pull up to the soccer field and she darts out and, has a great game. Ever since that experience, I have been much more deliberate in how I utilize sensory experiences in my life. I've got playlists on my phone for pumping me up, calming me down. And I will go right to those when I need to achieve those regulatory goals. I don't look at, the duty-free shop anymore in the international airport terminal the same way. I used to just see this as a store to get a discount on items. Now I see it as an emotion regulation store, because what's in those shops is just tons of colognes and perfumes. Why do we spray ourselves with perfumes and colognes? Impact the way other people feel about us. Sometimes even how we feel about ourselves. Those are pleasant smelling. Hotel chains, they capitalize on this effect. They pipe scents through their ventilation systems so that their premises smell good. So you want to be there, right? That's sensation. Touch, affectionate touch in the right context. Let's say that again for effect, like in the right context, but affectionate touch is great. Again, we're not talking about necessarily the salacious stuff, where some people might think it's just a hug, a pat on the back, a fist bump. Research shows that affectionate embraces release this cascade of stress-fighting chemicals. You're reminded that there are people who care about you. These are like little psychological or emotional jujitsu moves that you can use to just effortlessly push yourself in a different direction that you want to head towards. The effects aren't going to be necessarily long lasting, but that's okay, because there are other tools you can use to achieve that. But this is a powerful shifter in our toolbox.
Absolutely. And thank you, because most importantly is just awareness is often the first domino for so many things. And I know that I've had experiences where I forget how powerful music is. And just like, I remember, like, why didn't I put this on earlier? Like, this immediately shifted,
Yeah,
how I'm feeling. And just understanding this entire universe is just teeming with rhythm and vibration and, our atoms, and like sound really does deeply impact us. And even if you're just thinking about the context of listening to music, right? This is a miraculous process where the data, these tiny bones in our ears, are like doing their thing, and we're creating these electrical signals in our brain, and like music literally becomes a part of us. It literally becomes a part of us. It gets into our bodies. And so being more intentional in using that, and maybe also, again, steering away from things that might make you feel bad. Maybe there's a certain
that's
type of
right.
music, or maybe it's a certain type of message, that's coming through the news, which there are times when the news is valuable, but a lot of the time they're fishing for things to keep you worried, to keep you in fear. And it's because we have this sort of negativity bias as a species. But being aware of this, you can start to feed yourself, because it literally, again, it isn't just you are what you eat. It's you are what you listen to. It's you are what you breathe. Like, we're made up of the things that we associate with. And
That's right.
so I appreciate that so much. So this is just one category of these shifters, is sensory. So let's talk about another category.
Well, let's just to stay on this theme of, you are what you associate with. Another kind of shifter, one that's not internal, but external to us, outside of us, is in our environments, our spaces. And I think this is another place where we often take things not necessarily for granted, but like there are tools that are hidden in plain sight that we just don't think about sometimes. And again, like I include myself in this category before I knew about some of the science. So our physical environments shape our emotional responses in a few different ways. One way is in the same way that we develop attachments to other people. So there's some people in our lives that we feel really safe around and secure. And when we're struggling, being in their mere presence or even just thinking about them can make a difference. I'm looking at a picture of two right now on my side. I've got two picture frames. You see, I just did it, Shawn. I have designed my space with pictures of my daughters and wife where I can just look at them and get a little dose of resilience each time I do. And research shows that this benefits people. What I've done there is I am designing my environment to make it an environment that helps me live the kind of emotional life I want to live, helps me be more resilient. So earlier in my career, we did all these picture studies where we get people to think about negative experiences in their life, to stress them out. And then we show how just glancing at an image of someone that you are close to can really help you repair your emotions more quickly. After that research, I went on a shopping spree, bought all these picture frames and populated my different offices with them. I'm putting things in my environment now to help give me that emotional boost when I need it. Plants are another cue, right? Like green spaces, and we know that enhancing your exposure to green spaces improves our ability to restore our limited cognitive reserves when they become depleted. Right? It can be really restorative to go for a walk in a safe, natural setting, and if you can't do that, glance at a picture of a tree, or look at a tree. There's some research which shows that even the pictorial representations of nature make a difference. I also try to design my space so that it can shift me where I want by removing things that push me in an emotional direction I don't want to be. So we're talking right now, my cell phone is turned over. I don't have a face up where I could see my emails pop up. I have a real weakness for a delicacy called pizza. No matter what shape or form or temperature it comes in, I will eat the damn thing. And when I do, it triggers an emotional reaction that I don't want to have. Sometimes it's shame, because of my indulgence. I do eat it at times, to be clear, but I don't want to eat it at 9 o'clock at night when I glance at it, when I open the refrigerator to take some water upstairs. So what do? I don't keep it in the house. Like, I avoid the cues. That's me again, interacting with my environment strategically to shift me where I want to be. The last thing I'll mention about shifting with your environment goes back to this idea that we develop these positive or negative associations with places. And when you are struggling, navigating to those places can be a source of resilience. So in my neighborhood, there's the local arboretum, there's the tea house where I wrote my first book, there's one of my offices. Every time I'm in that space, I feel safe and secure, and it modulates my emotions. Now, there are some places that I'm less positively attached to that I try to avoid, because when I'm there, they don't make me feel as good. So that's just another example of how it's not just about things inside us. Yes, of course. And I talk about this in the book. There are lots of tools you can use to shift your attention and change the way you think about things and even relate to other people that can help you. We want to avail ourselves of all those shifters, but there are also simple things you could do just in the world around you that can make a difference as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. What this is stacking conditions, right? Stacking conditions in your favor and external conditions. And let's finish with, and again, there's a lot more in the book, with one of those internal shifters that we can utilize.
Okay, let's close it down with a perspective shifter. And this is one of my go-to tools. I think a lot of people have probably heard that if you're struggling, just change the way you think to change the way you feel. Sounds really simple. And in fact, like, if you can do that, that's a really, really useful tool. We are unique on this planet for our ability to reframe things, to look at things in a new light that can put us down a totally different emotional trajectory. The problem with this was eloquently summed up by a close friend of mine on a trip back from Detroit. He and his wife were in a car with my wife and myself. We're driving back home after dinner, and this friend of mine is talking about a problem he's encountering at work. And it's a source of stress. And his wife says to him, somewhat frustratingly, well, just focus on the bright side. Just think differently about it. And he looks at her with a tiny bit of revulsion, and he goes, yeah, easier effing said than done, to communicate something that I think is, something that we all resonate with to some extent, right? Like sometimes it's not so easy to reframe, right? Sometimes it's a lot easier for us to tell other people what to do, but when we try to do it ourselves, we struggle, right? Like, do as I say, not as I do. That's a popular phrase for a reason. And so what we've learned, though, are there are tools that exist to help you reframe. And we call them distancing tools. And what they involve doing is having people take a step back to think about their experience from a broader perspective. That does make it easier for people to work through their experiences when they're struggling. And there are a couple of ways you could do this. I'll just rattle off a few to be really tactical here. One thing you could do is talk to yourself silently like you would give advice to someone else, and actually use the word you to address yourself. All right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation? Here's what you're going to do. I think many people have had this experience of finding it easier to coach someone else through a problem than themselves. And when you use the word you to address yourself, it's essentially getting you to relate to yourself like you would be talking to another person. Because most of the time when we use the word you, so we're thinking about referring to someone else. So when you use the word you to think through your own problems, it's shifting your perspective. It's putting you into that advice giving mode. Makes it a lot easier to work through your problems well. Another thing you can do is jump into what I call your mental time travel machine. And you could go into the future or the past to help you. So if you're struggling with a big problem, think about how you're going to feel about this 5 days from now, 5 months from now, 5 years from now. Most of us have lived through a life of lots of emotional experiences that have at times felt really intense, but as time has gone on, their intensity has subsided. We lose sight of that in the moment that we're struggling because we zoom in on the worst part of that experience. Simply reminding yourself of, going into the future reminds us of, hey, whatever I'm going through, as bad as it is, it will eventually improve. And that does something really powerful for us when we're struggling. It gives us hope that things will get better. That turns the temperature down on our emotions. You could also jump into this mental time travel machine and go back in time. When I'm struggling, I will often go back to the 1930s and 40s when my grandparents were running away from the Nazis in Eastern Europe and Poland. Their families had just been slaughtered, and they're, moving from one ghetto to another, living in the woods in freezing conditions. And I will spend some time hanging out with them back then. And then I'll come back to the present and I'll compare the experiences. And I think to myself, man, what are you worried about? Right? Bubby and Papa, they just had their whole family murdered in front of them. And they were homeless for years and came here with nothing. And they didn't just endure, they survived and thrived. And you're upset about a bad email? Now, that's not to trivialize. That's not to say that my experience of being upset is unworthy. It is worthy, but it sure helps me put it in perspective. And that's what we're trying to do with these shifters here, is shift that perspective. And so those are just a few things you could do. And Shawn, what I love about all these tools is, someone asked me recently, have I gotten better at managing my emotions as a function of knowing these tools? And the answer is an unequivocal yes. I think if you were to chart my trajectory of emotion regulation improvement, it would look a lot like the stock market moves. So it's not a straight upward line. It's, it's a little jagged, and there's some big victories and sometimes some losses, but it's going up. It keeps going up. And the reason why there is that upward trajectory is I continue to learn about not just new tools, but how to fold these tools into my life profitably. So when I'm struggling, I don't have to sit in futs and think about, oh my God, what should I do? Or I don't know what to do. I know exactly what tool to turn to.
This is so powerful. In many ways, we don't experience life. We experience our thoughts about life. We experience our emotions in relationship to our life. We're all unique. And that experience is something that we have a say in. And I think that many of us feel disempowered today because we think that we are a victim to what's happening in the world around us. And we don't have a say in our experience. That's the thing. Again, not to say that bad things don't happen, challenging times, beautiful things, but our experience of them is something that we have a huge say in. And that's why this work
Absolutely.
is so important. And I want to encourage everybody to pick up a copy of Shift right now. It's available everywhere that books are sold. Is there somewhere in particular that you want people to go and pick up a copy? And also, where's somewhere that people can connect with you, maybe social media, just to get more information?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Shawn. It means a lot coming from you, that message, and it resonates really so strongly with me. If people want to learn more about me or the book, they could go to www.ethankross with a Kross.com. And I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, put updates there all the time. And yeah, pick it up wherever copies are sold. And if you find it useful, share it with other people, because I think we all have a hand to play in changing the culture surrounding this issue, which, I write about in the book. I think this is one of the big problems we face. And critically, it's a problem that we can solve. And that's a really motivating space to be working in. So thank you for having me on.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
The chemical imbalances don't exist. Researchers have been looking for decades. They've been doing brain scans on depressed patients looking for the serotonin imbalance that must exist in the brain. It's not there. So then the next logical question is, well, then where did that idea come from?